July 15th, 2026. For 5 consecutive hours last night, wave after wave of American precision munitions fell across Iran in a strike campaign that hit targets from the Persian Gulf coastline to deep inland provinces simultaneously. Bushehr struck again, Bandar Abbas crushed with multiple sequential impacts, Kish Island's port infrastructure lit up in fire visible from the water, Saravan hit, Sistan and Balochistan province targeted, communications towers in Bandar Abbas destroyed, and 4 ballistic missiles launched from the Jam missile field in Bushehr province in Iran's own retaliatory response, while cell coverage across Fars province collapsed entirely from the operational intensity around it. And then, in a moment that nobody in the mainstream coverage is connecting with sufficient weight to everything else happening in this conflict, President Trump stood in front of reporters and confirmed that Iran may have positioned long-range Shahed attack drones in Cuba within strike range of the continental United States, and said 3 words that should end every debate about what the American response would be. We will take care of it. The geography of this war just changed. What began as a conflict over the Strait of Hormuz, over commercial shipping lanes, over Iranian nuclear infrastructure and IRGC military capability in the Persian Gulf theater, what the world has been watching on footage from Bandar Abbas and Bahrain and Jordan for the past week, has in the last 24 hours produced a threat assessment that extends the operational consequences of this conflict across an ocean and into the Western Hemisphere. Iranian drones potentially staged in Cuba, American citizens on the mainland as a prospective target set, and a president who has already demonstrated his willingness to execute exactly the kind of strike response that nobody believed would actually happen until the first Tomahawk was in the air, saying they will be taken care of in short order without hesitation. This is not the same conflict it was 72 hours ago. But let's back all the way up, because to understand the full weight of what unfolded last night and what the Cuba revelation means for where this goes next, you need to understand the operational picture that preceded it, the 5-hour mission, the specific targets, the weapons employed, and the Iranian response that confirms an institution firing everything it has left at a situation it is no longer capable of controlling. The 5-hour strike mission that CENTCOM officially documented on the night of July 13th into the early hours of July 14th was not an escalation from previous packages in terms of target category. It was an escalation in terms of geographic reach, operational persistence, and the deliberate communication embedded in which specific targets were selected and struck. CENTCOM's official statement confirmed the scope. U.S. forces successfully struck military targets across Iran, including Bushehr, Chabahar, Jask, Konarak, Abu Musa, and Bandar Abbas, with the stated operational objective of degrading Iran's ability to attack commercial shipping. That list spans Iran's entire operational coastline, from the Strait of Hormuz approaches at Bandar Abbas and Jask, to the southeastern deepwater port at Chabahar, to the strategically positioned island of Abu Musa in the Persian Gulf, to the Konarak naval area in Sistan and Balochistan province. Striking all of those locations in a single 5-hour operational window is not a strike package. It is a full coastal sweep, conducted simultaneously, designed to eliminate every remaining node of the Iranian maritime threat architecture that previous packages had not yet fully neutralized. Bandar Abbas absorbed particularly severe treatment, multiple sequential explosions, heavy smoke columns visible long after the initial strikes, indicating fires burning through infrastructure with enough material fuel content to sustain themselves well beyond the kinetic impact moment. Bandar Abbas is not simply a port. It is the command center of the IRGC Navy's Persian Gulf operations, the hub from which the naval threat to commercial shipping has been directed, the facility whose destruction fundamentally changes what the IRGC Navy can coordinate and execute in the operational area. When Bandar Abbas burns at the scale the footage shows, the IRGC's ability to run a coherent naval campaign degrades in ways that reach every fast attack boat, every coastal defense battery, every drone launch system that was receiving command direction from that hub. You do not need to destroy every instrument if you destroy the hand that holds them. Kish Island was targeted at its port area, with footage showing fire burning directly on the waterline, the characteristic signature of fast attack boats or naval vessels struck at their moorings, fuel igniting at the point of impact and spreading across the water surface in a visual that is simultaneously dramatic and analytically precise. Kish Island's position in the Persian Gulf gives the IRGC a forward presence well positioned to threaten shipping transit routes that run through the Gulf's central channel. Eliminating the naval assets stationed there removes a forward capability that the IRGC has been using to extend its reach into the shipping lanes without operating from the Iranian mainland directly. Every boat burning at Kish Island's waterline is a boat that will not be conducting interdiction operations against commercial shipping next week. The communications towers targeted in Bandar Abbas and on Kish Island carry a different but equally important strategic value. Communications infrastructure is not a weapon system in the traditional sense, but in the context of a military campaign that is systematically degrading the IRGC's ability to coordinate across its distributed coastal architecture, Communications nodes are the connective tissue that makes any coordinated military operation possible. Destroy the radar and you blind the air defense. Destroy the communications tower and you sever the command relationship between that radar and the missile battery it was supposed to cue. Destroy enough communications nodes across a wide enough geographic area, and you do not just degrade individual facilities. You fragment the situational awareness picture that allows an IRGC commander to understand what is happening across his theater of operations simultaneously. A fragmented picture produces fragmented decisions, delayed responses, and the kind of command paralysis that allows strike packages to prosecute their target sets with less interference than a fully networked adversary could generate. But the detail in this operational window that is receiving the least analysis relative to its strategic significance is the HIMARS. Footage confirmed United States high-mobility artillery rocket system launchers operating from Bahrain firing projectiles into Iranian territory. 2 separate launches captured on footage, missiles climbing into the night sky and disappearing beyond visual range, heading toward targets deep inside Iran. The HIMARS is a ground-based precision rocket artillery system that has acquired a global reputation in recent years from its deployment in the Ukraine conflict, where its ability to strike high-value targets at ranges exceeding 80 kilometers with precision-guided munitions fundamentally changed the character of that conflict's artillery dimension. Its presence as an active strike asset against Iranian targets from a Bahraini launch position is a significant expansion of the weapon systems being employed in this campaign, not because the HIMARS is more destructive than the Tomahawk or the GBU-31, but because its deployment represents the ground-based precision strike dimension activating alongside the air, and naval strike dimensions that have been the campaign's primary instruments up to this point. When ground-based precision rocket artillery joins the air campaign and the naval strike campaign simultaneously against the same target set, the number of approach vectors the adversary's air defense must account for multiplies beyond what a limited and already degraded system can coherently manage. Every additional platform adding a new vector is another layer of simultaneous threat that the IRGC's compromised radar network and degraded air defense architecture has to try to track, assess, and engage, while already operating on a power grid that is rolling through blackouts across the country, and a command network whose communications nodes are being struck by the same strike packages that are degrading the air defense systems. 50,000 United States troops are deployed in the operational theater. CENTCOM's own statement confirmed that number. 50,000 American military personnel in the region, with the carrier strike groups repositioned north toward Iranian waters, with aerial refueling tankers confirmed active over Bahrain, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE simultaneously, sustaining the aircraft in the air, extending loiter times, keeping strike packages on station over the target area longer than internal fuel loads would allow, with HIMARS on the ground and Bahrain firing into Iran, with Tomahawks threading in from Arleigh Burke destroyers at sea, with F-18s and F-35s cycling off carrier decks. The operational picture that emerges from those elements assembled together is not the picture of a campaign reaching its terminal phase. It is the picture of a campaign that has reached its full operational deployment and is now executing against its complete target, set with every asset it has committed to the theater. And simultaneously, Iran launched back. 4 ballistic missiles from the Jam missile field in Bushehr province launched in a single salvo. More launches from Kermanshah. Ballistic missiles and drone launches directed at U.S. military targets in Bahrain and Jordan. Iran specifically claimed its targeting in Bahrain included the HMS Jafar facility linked to U.S. Fifth Fleet operations, fuel storage infrastructure, Patriot radar systems, CRAM systems, early warning infrastructure, and arms depots. In Jordan, Iran claimed strikes against several major U.S. military bases, and in the Strait and its immediate approaches, Iranian forces struck multiple ships, with the UAE Ministry of Defense confirming that 2 Emirati national tankers were hit by cruise missiles, 1 person killed, 8 more injured. 3 ships bombed by Iran in a single overnight operational window, continuing the exact behavior, attacking commercial shipping, that triggered the American campaign's current intensity in the first place. The pattern here is the most important analytical data point in the entire operational exchange, and it is the one that the immediate coverage of individual strike and counter-strike events consistently fails to elevate to its appropriate analytical weight. Iran attacked commercial shipping. The United States responded with a campaign that has now struck more than 300 Iranian military targets across multiple operational nights. Iran responded to those strikes by attacking more commercial shipping, plus Gulf state civilian areas and military positions. The United States continued striking Iranian military infrastructure. Iran continued attacking commercial shipping and civilian adjacent targets in Gulf states. The cycle is not a cycle of matching escalation met with de-escalation and negotiation. It is a cycle of Iranian behavior that created the trigger, followed by American strikes that created the military pressure, followed by the same Iranian behavior, restarting the cycle at the next available operational opportunity. Iran is not deterred by strikes on its military infrastructure from continuing the behavior that the strikes were intended to stop. It is absorbing those strikes while continuing that behavior with whatever residual capability the strikes have not yet eliminated. That observation carries a strategic conclusion that the Trump administration has clearly already drawn, and that its public statements have been communicating with increasing directness over the past several days. An adversary that continues the triggering behavior while absorbing the retaliatory strikes is not an adversary that responds to calibrated pressure. It is an adversary that responds to comprehensive capability elimination, to the reduction of its military capacity to the point where the triggering behavior becomes physically impossible rather than merely discouraged. That is the logic that runs from 170 targets to 300 targets to 5 hours of strikes against every node of the coastal defense architecture simultaneously. It is the logic that runs from revoking the oil license to declaring the naval blockade to severing the rail corridor to destroying the Chabahar port. It is not a logic of escalation for its own sake. It is the logic of closing every option sequentially until the option of continuing the triggering behavior simply does not exist anymore. And now that logic has encountered its most alarming extension yet. Cuban territory. Iranian drones. The continental United States as a prospective target. Trump's response to the question about Iranian Shahed drones potentially staged in Cuba was not hedged, not qualified, not diplomatic. He said, "If they do have that, we will take care of it." He added, in short order, he added, "We're not going to have a problem. We're not going to allow that to happen." That statement, delivered from the American president in public and on the record, is not a warning. It is a commitment. And in the specific context of a president who has already demonstrated in the past week of this conflict that his public commitments to military action are executed rather than walked back, who declared the ceasefire over and the bombers came, who named Pickaxe Mountain as a target on national radio and the planning proceeded, who said we are going to hit them very hard tonight and the HIMARS were firing from Bahrain by nightfall. There is no reasonable basis for treating this statement as rhetorical. The Cuba development requires its own analytical framework, separate from the Strait of Hormuz campaign, because the strategic logic of positioning attack drones in Cuba operates in a completely different dimension from the IRGC's coastal defense operations in the Persian Gulf. Long-range Shahed drones, staged 90 miles from the Florida coast, are not a military capability in the same sense that fast attack boats in the Strait of Hormuz or ballistic missiles fired from Bushehr province are military capabilities. They are a terror capability. They are a homeland threat capability. They are the instrument of an adversary that has concluded, or is testing whether it can create the conditions to threaten, the American civilian population directly on American soil as a lever against an American government that has been bombing Iranian military targets with increasing intensity and scope. The logic of that positioning, if confirmed, is the logic of deterrence through mutual vulnerability. If Iran can credibly threaten American civilians at home, the American public and American political decision makers must weigh the cost of continuing the campaign against the risk of a retaliatory strike on the mainland. It is the same logic that the Soviet Union used during the Cold War when it positioned nuclear assets in Cuba in 1962. Not because those assets were militarily decisive in a conventional sense, but because their presence created a deterrence equation that forced a recalculation of the acceptable cost of American pressure. The Iranian version is not nuclear, and the Shahed drone is not the SS-4 ballistic missile. But the strategic logic of placing lethal capability in proximity to the American homeland to change the decision calculus in Washington is identical in its intent. The difference between 1962 and now is who is in the White House and what they have already demonstrated they are willing to do. The Kennedy administration's response to Soviet missiles in Cuba was a naval blockade, not a strike, a coercive pressure instrument that created a diplomatic path for the Soviets to withdraw without the appearance of total capitulation. The Trump administration's response to Iranian military behavior in the Strait of Hormuz was not a diplomatic note. It was 5 hours of strikes against every node of the Iranian coastal military architecture simultaneously. The decision calculus about whether placing drones in Cuba changes the American campaign's trajectory is a calculation that has to be made against the backdrop of how Washington has actually responded to Iranian threats and Iranian military action throughout this conflict, not how it might be expected to respond based on historical precedent or diplomatic convention. Trump said we will take care of it. In this conflict, when Trump says we will take care of something, the CENTCOM target imagery that follows tells you what taking care of it looks like. The question of whether Iranian drones in Cuba constitute a casus belli for American military action on or near Cuban territory is not a question that has been publicly adjudicated, but the president's statement carries the unmistakable implication that it is a question whose answer has already been decided in private. Now look at the operational picture across the full theater, because the Iran-Cuba development does not exist in isolation from the broader conflict architecture that is simultaneously pressing Iran from every direction. In the 5-hour mission last night, Bushehr was struck again, the same province that has been targeted across multiple strike packages, the same area adjacent to nuclear infrastructure that the campaign has been progressively approaching, the same geographic zone whose continued targeting reflects an American assessment that the target set in that region has not been exhausted by previous strikes. Bushehr remains a top priority on the American target list, and its repeated inclusion in successive strike packages means that the facilities and infrastructure in that province are either being struck multiple times because previous strikes produced incomplete destruction, or that new targets are being identified and struck as the ISR picture of the province continues to develop. Either interpretation tells you that the campaign against Bushehr has not reached its endpoint, and that whatever sits at the most sensitive locations in that province remains a continuing target set. Saravan and the broader Sistan and Baluchistan province were struck in this window as well, a geographic extension of the campaign into Iran's southeastern interior that reflects the continued expansion of the American target set beyond the coastal installations that defined the campaign's early phases. The strikes in Sistan and Baluchistan, combined with the strikes in Bandar Abbas, in Kish Island, in Konarak, and in Bushehr simultaneously, produce a geographic footprint that covers almost the entirety of Iran's southern and southeastern military presence in a single operational period. The 5-hour mission was not a focused strike against one target set or one geographic area. It was a theater-wide sweep conducted with the persistence and the platform availability that 50,000 deployed troops, 2 carrier strike groups, HIMARS batteries on the ground, and a refueling tanker network over 4 Gulf states simultaneously provides. The IRGC's response to all of this reveals the current state of its operational capacity more honestly than any statement from Tehran could. It fired 4 ballistic missiles from Bushehr province, from a province that has just been struck again overnight, from launch sites that are operating within the footprint of an active American strike campaign, from a force whose supply chain to replacement missiles has been severed at the rail corridor and blockaded at the maritime channels. It fired additional launches from Kermanshah. It claimed strikes against Fifth Fleet infrastructure in Bahrain. It attacked 3 more commercial ships in and around the Strait of Hormuz, killing 1 person and injuring 8 more. It scrambled fighter jets over Isfahan, the same jets that have been scrambled across multiple strike packages that reach altitude after the American aircraft have completed their missions and departed, that find nothing to engage because the aircraft they were scrambled to intercept are already on their way home. The operational pattern of the IRGC's response is the pattern of an institution applying its entire remaining toolkit against a threat that its remaining toolkit cannot meaningfully contest. The ballistic missiles are the largest scale retaliatory instrument available. The commercial shipping attacks are the economic leverage instrument. The fighter jet scrambles are the air defense response. And all 3 of those instruments applied simultaneously at maximum available intensity are producing outcomes: partially intercepted missiles, continued American strike packages, and global condemnation for attacking civilian commercial shipping that are not changing the trajectory of the campaign being conducted against the IRGC's military infrastructure. The institutional logic that drives the IRGC to keep attacking commercial shipping, even as those attacks trigger increasingly devastating American strikes, is not irrational within the IRGC's own strategic framework. It is the logic of an institution that has bet everything on the proposition that control of the Strait of Hormuz is a leverage instrument that the United States cannot simply eliminate militarily without producing consequences, economic, diplomatic, and strategic, that make the military campaign politically unsustainable in Washington. The IRGC keeps attacking ships because it believes that enough disruption to global oil markets and global shipping will eventually create enough pressure on the American side to produce a negotiated outcome that preserves some version of the regime's strategic position. Every ship it strikes is a data point in the argument it is making to the world. You cannot afford for us not to be managed, and managing us requires giving us something. The problem with that argument is that the American campaign has been simultaneously reducing the IRGC's ability to make it. Every fast attack boat at the bottom of the Persian Gulf is a boat that cannot attack another ship. Every coastal radar site gone dark is a surveillance node that cannot identify and track the next commercial vessel. Every communications tower destroyed is a command link that cannot coordinate the next launch. Every ammunition depot eliminated is a finite stock of the weapons that make the argument materially. And every day that the naval blockade is in effect is a day that the supply of replacement weapons, replacement radar systems, and replacement fast attack boats cannot arrive through any primary channel. The IRGC is making its argument with instruments that the campaign is reducing in number and effectiveness with every operational period that passes. The Cuba question is where this argument hits its most extreme extension. If the IRGC has positioned Shahed drones in Cuba as a means of threatening the American homeland, of escalating the argument to a level where the cost of American military action is felt not just by American military personnel in the Gulf, but by American civilians on American soil, then the institution has made a calculation about the risk it is willing to accept that deserves the most serious analytical scrutiny. Because the American response to a confirmed homeland threat is not going to be calibrated. It is not going to be proportional in the sense that the previous strike packages have been proportional to the triggering behavior that preceded them. The American political and military response to a confirmed Iranian capability staged on Cuban territory for the purpose of striking the continental United States is in a completely different category from the response to attacks on commercial shipping in the Strait of Hormuz, however serious those attacks are. Trump's statement, "We will take care of it in short order," is not a proportional response framework. It is a termination framework. Now step back from the individual operational events and look at the three pressure tracks that have been converging throughout this conflict and what their current state tells you about where the next 48 to 72 hours lead. The military track produced a 5-hour strike mission across Iran's entire operational coastline last night, confirmed HIMARS employment from Bahraini territory, ongoing strikes in Sistan and Balochistan and Bushehr, carrier strike groups positioned north of their previous patrol areas, and 50,000 American troops deployed in the operational theater. The campaign has not peaked. It has not paused for diplomatic assessment. It has not indicated any intention to reduce its operational tempo in the absence of a confirmed Iranian concession on the primary demand: cessation of attacks on commercial shipping and acceptance of the Strait of Hormuz as an international waterway outside Iranian sovereign control. The military track is running at full operational speed, and the announcement that Pickaxe Mountain remains a coming target is the signal that the campaign's most consequential single strike has not yet occurred. The economic track closed every primary valve simultaneously. Oil revenue license revoked, Chabahar struck, rail corridor severed, naval blockade declared and in effect. The blockade, effective as of July 14th, means that the only remaining supply avenue is the Caspian Sea route to Russia, which is slower, lower in volume, and subject to the kind of targeting attention that the American campaign has applied to every Iranian logistics channel it has identified. The financial position of the IRGC, already operating under the cumulative pressure of every previous economic measure, is now facing the terminal constraint of a formal naval blockade that prevents replenishment from any primary direction. The psychological track has reached its most extreme point with the Cuba revelation, not because drones in Cuba represent a military threat that the American military cannot handle. Trump's response made the American assessment of that threat's manageability clear, but because the willingness of the Iranian system to position offensive capabilities in the Western Hemisphere, 90 miles from the American coast, represents an escalatory step that changes the domestic American political environment for this conflict in a way that no Gulf strike package achieves. Attacks on commercial shipping in the Strait of Hormuz affect global oil markets and shipping companies. The potential presence of Iranian attack drones in Cuba affects the American voter directly and personally in a way that makes the political cost of military restraint dramatically higher than the political cost of military action. The structural risk that sits at the center of this moment is the decision-making capacity of the Iranian command structure at the intersection of military, economic, and strategic maximum pressure. An institution that is absorbing 5-hour strike packages across its entire coastal military architecture, operating on a nationally failing power grid, blockaded at every maritime port, severed from its land-based supply chain to Russia and China, watching its hardline commanders continue to order attacks on commercial shipping because that is the only strategic instrument they have left, and potentially maintaining offensive capabilities in Cuban territory as a last resort deterrence instrument. That institution is operating in a strategic space where rational options and irrational options are becoming increasingly difficult to distinguish from inside the institution's own analytical framework. The IRGC commander who orders another commercial ship attacked tonight is not making a strategic miscalculation by his own institutional logic. He is doing the only thing his institution's doctrine tells him to do when under maximum pressure: apply the leverage instrument that it believes cannot be simply eliminated militarily. But he is doing it with fewer boats, fewer missiles, less ammunition, degraded communications, intermittent power, and against an adversary that has now publicly confirmed it is investigating whether he has positioned drones in Cuba, and has stated in plain language that if so, they will be taken care of. Go back to the overnight footage, the flash in the top right corner of the frame over Bandar Abbas, the fire burning at the waterline of Kish Island's port area, where the fast attack boats were moored until the strike arrived. The HIMARS missiles climbing into the dark sky over Bahrain and disappearing beyond visual range, heading north toward Iranian territory. The 4 ballistic missiles rising from the Jam missile field in Bushehr province, climbing into the same airspace that American aircraft have been transiting freely for days, heading toward targets in the Gulf states whose air defense systems have been intercepting Iranian missiles with a consistency that the IRGC's own launch footage, documenting departures, not arrivals, cannot honestly characterize as anything other than systematic failure to achieve the intended military effects. And somewhere in Cuba, if the reports are accurate, Shahed drones sitting in storage, staged by an institution that has run out of conventional military options in the theater, where the fight is actually happening, and has reached for the most extreme possible deterrence instrument it believes it has left, a direct threat to the country that is conducting the campaign, on territory 90 miles from its coast, daring the American response to be the one that changes the political calculation in Washington. Trump said, "We will take care of it." The CENTCOM target imagery from the past week is the documentation of what taking care of things looks like when this administration makes that commitment. The 5-hour mission, the HIMARS fire, the burning boats at Kish Island's waterline, the smoke columns rising over Bandar Abbas that were still visible in morning footage hours after the initial strikes. All of it is the record of a campaign that has been saying the same thing in the language of precision munitions that Trump said to a reporter in 3 words: "We will take care of it." And the next target on the list, the one that has been publicly named, the one that Iran's hardened tunnels and deeply buried centrifuges and stockpiled highly enriched uranium have been waiting to meet since the engineering of its protection was designed, Pickaxe Mountain has not been struck yet. The most consequential single action of this entire conflict has not yet happened. Everything the world has watched over the past week, the 170 targets, the 300 total, the 5-hour coastal sweep, the HIMARS from Bahrain, the naval blockade, the severed rail, the destroyed port, has been the preparation. The campaign's center of gravity is still coming. And when it arrives, the question of whether any of this ends on terms negotiated at a table rather than terms dictated by a depleted institution watching its last protected infrastructure go the way of everything else it thought would survive. That question will have its answer